Hey, I'm Diane Gibbs, and I work at the University of South Alabama, and I'm a graphic designer, and I've been a designer for almost 20 years. So I think visual presentation of your course materials is really important. You don't want to overwhelm. So let's jump in, and let me give you this presentation. So this is visual design of your course presentation materials. First, you have to know what you want your audience to take away. You want to present your content in a context that's going to be remembered. But you want them to remember the content, not the context. So you'll notice here I'm pulling a thought bubble. This is a distraction. As you see the rest of the slides, you'll realize that this one kind of doesn't fit. So if you have an activity for people to do, this is a really good idea for you to kind of shake up, either with color, your pop color, or something like that. So right now, what I'd like for you to do is we're starting it off with an exercise, is take just 2 minutes and write down some ideas about how you think your current visuals stack up. Maybe it's just, a few words that you can jot down. If they're dynamic, if they're interesting, if they're a lot on the slide, or if they're kind of boring, or whatever it is, how do you think your visuals currently stack up? All right, hopefully you've got that. It'll kind of give us where to start from. So your visuals should always support your message without taking over the message. When your visuals don't support your point, your message is lost. 3 areas to focus on in creating professional presentations are design, which we're going to talk about layout and theme, typography, and imagery. So let's jump into design, layout, and theme. So like with any audience, you're building trust with each slide. You need to have a plan. You don't need to show up unprepared. So showing up unprepared would be like showing up without pants. And again, obviously not something you want to do. So let's talk about layout. All these examples most of all of them are from slideshare.net, and they're courtesy of whoever it is that created them, and they're over here in the bottom left-hand corner. You want to create a strong opening slide, an opening slide that gives a hint of what's going to be inside the rest of the presentation. It's kind of like a book cover. If you create a really interesting book cover, you want the book to be interesting. If you have a really interesting book cover, but the story is just really flat or overwhelming, not probably a good idea, but we've all read books like this. So you want to make sure that the opening slide is strong, but what's more important, that you're following that opening slide with designs that clearly reflect and follow the choices made in that first slide. So, for example, color, style, tone, and format. Sometimes I will create that first slide last because I will have created everything else already, and I will go off of my basic design and create something that's eye-catching. So let's look at this one. This is an opening slide that I found on SlideShare, and it gives you an idea of what the interior slides are going to be like. I expect to see blue. I expect to see this kind of curvy lines. I expect it to be dynamic, and I expect it to have pop of orange or yellow. And here's an internal. So it is blue. It does have yellow, but there's some problems. There's actually way too much on the slide. The dynamicism that was created on the first slide is lost here. When you put text, we'll get into this a little bit later, but when you put text in a centered format, it makes it really difficult to read. If it's just a few lines, 3 lines, 4 lines, and it's 5 to 7 words, it can be centered. But anything other than that is going to be really hard for your viewer. This should have been broken up into 5 slides. So here's what a lot of people end up doing. They just have a white slide with black text, which if that's all you can do, I'm going to show you some basic things that can make this a little bit more interesting. And what I would want to encourage you is not to have a slide that is simply just text. Maybe you could do something like this, where it's still just text, but it has a lot more hierarchy than this. So all you've done is created a box with a color. You have a color palette, and you have the text, the header, the headline in white, and then you have a subhead in another color, and then your body text is below. And there's lots of white space. Don't be afraid of white space. White space gives your eye a place to rest. So let's talk about layout. When you see something like this is a landscape, so it's a bucolic landscape. It feels peaceful. This is a strong horizontal landscape. When you have a strong horizontal line or field, it gives very peaceful feeling for your viewer. So something like this doesn't have a lot of dynamic or really solid super strong. I'm not getting that. I'm just getting, it's peaceful. Let's just keep going. Maybe the content isn't peaceful, but it is peaceful for the eye, for the viewer to read. And then I'm just pulling from art store images that we have access to here to teach this. This is Napoleon, a good, strong, very solid vertical line, which shows us when we think of things like this, psychologically it's been proven that this is very structurally sound. We feel very solid. We feel really comfortable with this kind of a layout. So you could do something kind of like this, where again the background is very, very, very subtle, but you have a strong vertical on the left or on the right hand side. On the left hand side would be a little bit more natural, so that's why this one's on the left hand side with just a plain header and then body text. And then here's the Rape of the Sabine Women, which is a very strong dynamic layout with strong angles. And angles show activity, they show movement, they show progress, they also show it's very dynamic. So you could create something that was dynamic as well by having a strong solid triangle shape in a corner. Again, the background is very subtle. And if you can't do that, then at least you could create a solid color in the background, put your header in color, making it you're creating clear hierarchy, and possibly putting that header in all caps or at least in a color and possibly a different typeface that'll help it to stand out. And just having the background not be solid white will help. But again, you want it to be very subtle. So let's talk about the color palette. You should pick colors. You want to pick 3 to 10 colors. 10 may be a little too many, but maybe 3 to 5, 3 to 7 colors that you can build your presentation around. One of them is going to be a color that is your main color, that's your go-to color, like mine is this gray. And then you have an accent color that's used. So I use a resource called design-seeds.com. It takes photos and pulls out 5 to 6 colors from that and makes a color palette for you. You can type in a hex value, so you say you wanted your main color to be this green. It'll give you a bunch of different palettes that utilize that same green, that allows you to pick different palettes from. So this is, or you could find a picture that you like and you can use a color picker in Photoshop or another photo program to pull pick your own colors. But this is also from Design Seeds, and it populated 6 color palette or colors from me. But yellow is a hard palette to use with a white or light background, so I opted for a purple instead. So I added that. Purple and yellow are opposite on the color wheel, so it gave me this palette, which, as you can see, the purple is used on the little tape pieces. White is the background. The very background is the lightest gray. There is The other colors, you'll see the light blue, the second from the left on the top, is always used at the top. The first blue, or the gray blue in the upper left-hand corner, is always used at the bottom. And that's where I'm showing my citations. So let's talk about theme. You can use a theme to help tell a story or engage the audience further. You can use color, style of imagery, humor, or even a creative concept, and maybe even all of them. So here is, I believe, a young child's presentation of cowboys. And again, as we see the first slide, we expect we are going to know what the next slides will be. And I am taking them in order of how I believe this child did it in SlideShare. But unfortunately, I feel like a lot of us use these same techniques. And it's okay if a kid does it, but not so okay if we do it. So the first slide shows us this kind of gold type where it's on a worn leather background, which goes with cowboys. So I can understand that. But here's the next slide. Super technical. Went from a serif, kind of traditional typeface, to a sans serif, very technical, and it looks like the back of a speaker or something. It looks very technical and not anything to do with cowboys, actually. The next slide is this, which looks like asphalt or pavement, and then another typeface. Again, none of these typefaces connect it together, so you want to use one consistent typeface and have maybe another pop typeface that you use for emphasis. And again, the fourth slide in her cowboy slideshow is on a chalkboard, which again doesn't help. She's used 3 different bullets just to not get bored, and another typeface, and one I hope nobody will use, which is Comic Sans. And if that weren't enough, the type, I guess, defaulted on her, and the title ran off the edge of the page. Again, another background that doesn't go with cowboys. Now here's an example by Jessie Desjardins, and this is a great example of using limited color and using found photography or purchased photography that really goes with a theme. So again, this is all about PowerPoint and 5 shocking design mistakes you need to avoid. So there's some things that are going to connect these. The black and white photography is going to be consistent, and then these bright, vivid colors, as well as utilizing the white space within the photos. So let's look at the first one. It's zoomed in. You'll see this as a typical of this particular slideshow that Jessie Desjardins created. And then he is cutting off, really zooming in and utilizing that white space. Even though it's physically not white, it's resting space. And so it really poses fun. All of the images that are used have humor involved. So this is another one by HubSpot, which they create amazing, really clever presentations. It's a marketing company. And this is how social media is a lot like sex. I'm going to show a few from this series. The first slide, I believe, is not as good. It doesn't go with the rest of the presentation as well, but it does connect visually with the typeface, but otherwise it doesn't connect. Color, and mainly it's the color red and blue, you don't see that. So let me show you a couple of the other slides that are in this presentation. Again, a lot of white space, but the same typefaces that we saw here, we see here. And it's all about social media, and it's kind of making this again, connection, how social media is a lot like sex. So that people in bed, or people covering up, or people whispering. And then they've used this kind of fact. They're pulling colors from the guy's hair, I believe. And then they're continuing it. Don't be afraid of not filling every piece of your slide. You can use big arrows to point out facts. And here's where it's a little bit harder sometimes to get the type, but the type into a white space area because there's not a ton of white space here. But again, they're really trying. They're using black with two colors, white and an orange. Using white space again. White space again. People are looking, the models are looking where the type is. That's really important as well. And then this is kind of, how do you do it? You are remarkable. And you show your affection. This is a great one because it's very busy with a story, right? But it's using the white space in the upper left-hand corner to hold your attention and bring it back around with their message. So you want to use visuals that you can create. You can create things like case studies or infographics, even if you're not a designer or an artist or don't think you have any capabilities. I'm going to show you how. So HubSpot has a Pinterest board all about their case studies. And case studies are really interesting, and most of us can do this with almost anything that we teach. Again, by creating these case studies, it's just ways that students can come back and access the material that you've created or that you shared in class. Remember, we are building trust with every slide. Here's kind of what not to do. You don't want to be too basic and cover things that everybody should already know. This might be helpful for maybe a second grader who doesn't know what a row and a column is or a data area is. But another area of problem with this slide is not that the content is just too basic, which it is, but also there's too many colors and they're trying to do bells and whistles for impact, but it really just takes your eye away. The gradient inside the little boxes that says column fields or row fields or data area. First of all, there's way too much data on this graph. That would be too much to show someone, and they're going to disengage. This is actually a good example of the amount of data that somebody could take in one slide. They're comparing 2007 and 2008, and they have 5 entries. The next one is 7. It gets a little confusing, but I still can take it in. But 7 is almost the max. 5 is a much better comparative study, and it doesn't overwhelm the viewer. This is 8, and it is too much because this type is too small. There's not enough contrast from the color of the bar to the color of the type, so we would need a darker color that would help that white type to stand out. But this should be a warning sign. And then this one, the audience has disengaged. You have pulled too much information, and if I was staying on this slide, I would have to stay on the slide for a while, and my audience is lost. I love this site called infogr.am. So infogram, that's how I'm going to refer to it. And you're going to also. This graphic is something that you could possibly create in this kind of infographic, or you could create an infographic on your own. But if you want to have a lot of information, like what's going on in this slide, maybe put a round red circle around the area that you are going to be talking about. So with Infogram, you can create infographics, headlines, quotes, charts, graphs, and you can even import your data from Excel. And here's how Infogram works. You choose a template. You start with, started with a quote that you type in. I did this about girls in math and science. I just pulled some information from the internet. And then you decide what kind of chart you want to put in. And it allows you to pull in your information. You can pull in photos. And then you could connect it to your color palette. So you can pick your own colors. If you don't have a color palette, you could choose some colors that are already there. So at least it goes with the rest of your presentation. And then it also gives you a lot of different ways, different charts to show, how to show. You don't just have to use a bar graph or something like this. This is showing the number of men compared to the pea green color is the number of women, and then the bright yellow green, spring green, is the underrepresented minority women. So you get kind of an idea of how many by showing the colors. Now let's talk about typography. It's hard to believe, but there is more to creating professional looking materials than simply picking the right typefaces. Here's 12 elements to consider. The first is, should I use serif or sans serif? When you're using serif type, which is over on the left-hand side, that would be great for headlines that are on screen or printed materials. So you're going to hand a class a printed handout or something. The one on the right is best. It's sans serif. It is best for on-screen. Your body text, things like that should be in sans serif for ease of readability and quicker for readability. So remember, serif should be for paper, your body text on paper, and sans serif should be body text on screen. The next is, what typeface should I use? This is Tracy Batista, and I love her as an artist, but I'm not sure she did a great job of honoring veterans with these typefaces that she chose. It would kind of be like you're not honoring the person who passed away and you're at a funeral and you wore a tutu. You can do it, but it probably isn't the best place to wear that tutu. So let's talk about what typefaces are not appropriate for your presentations. The typeface at the top is Comic Sans. The red is really difficult to read, possibly because it's kind of vibrating on the background. This is all about metals, right? This is not something that you would probably be teaching a kindergartner, which is the only place you should use Comic Sans. But a lot of people use Comic Sans as a way to dumb down or soften an experience. They might put information that would be hard to digest, by meaning it might hurt their feelings, or it might be hard, and they dumb it down by, they think they're dumbing it down by putting it in Comic Sans. Doesn't work. This is the second slide of the slide series. This is the third slide. This is crazy that somebody changes the background. We don't need to change the background. You need one consistent background throughout your whole piece, because it's not about the background, it's about the content. Remember, it's about the content. So this is probably a better background. If I was choosing again, it doesn't have pop, and it is still using Comic Sans, which not excited about that. Probably too heady for a kindergartner, to be honest. So again, please do not use this typeface. If you have a bunch of kids that are dyslexic, that is the only other appropriate use for Comic Sans. It does help dyslexics to read the type better. There is a Comic Sans pledge at comicsanscriminal.com. Matt Dempsey has created this. And again, I love that he's asking people to sign this pledge and to really understand that the choice of the font that you are picking has the power to subconsciously and incorrectly set a tone for the piece of a printed material or on-screen material. And as a result, by signing this, as a result of this promise, you will promise to seriously consider whether Comic Sans is an appropriate font choice before using it in any printed or on-screen work. And I think this is funny, but it's really important to know that it really does subconsciously affect the tone of the piece that you're creating. So let's talk about color contrast. A lot of times people will use the default backgrounds that are given in PowerPoint or in Keynote. And that's fine, but you need to make sure that you're not using dark text on a dark background or white text on a light background. Here, the top, there's probably too much text on this slide because at the top it's getting a little light. Maybe it's okay, but it is pushing the boundary. You probably want a slide that is dark all over, not really light in some areas and really dark in other areas. Your typography is doing its job when you don't notice it. Kind of like a good, when you're at a restaurant or at a museum and there's background music. It's background music and it enhances your experience. It doesn't take over and you can't even experience. It impedes. If you were at a restaurant and there was really loud music, you couldn't even talk to the person who you came there with. That would be something that it impedes the experience, and your type can do that. So we want to make sure that we're choosing type and backgrounds and colors that help our message and that it acts sort of like background as a support character. Now let's talk about size. This is probably okay. This is pushing it a little bit. You could probably maybe make the leading, which is the space between the lines, a little bit bigger, but it gives us, there's a lot of white space. I understand, I can read this. It's not too small. But this, way too small. This is sans serif, which is great, but this looks like it could be maybe 2 or 3 slides. Definitely at least 2 slides. So for printed documents, your body type should be between 8 and 11 points in size. When you're on screen, it's going to be different. Sometimes, again, you don't want to have so much text on one slide. Number 5, format and hierarchy. So if everything's the same size, there's no hierarchy and I don't know where to look. And so you're forced to underline things or put things in italic. Well, it would be better if you understand hierarchy by using size and maybe not everything in all caps. Everything in all caps doesn't make it easier for you to understand what's going on. It just feels like you're yelling at me. Type effects. Not a big fan of this. Type effects are kind of like unnecessary distractions, and it impedes the communication for your audience. Your audience doesn't know why you wore your Halloween costume to work in February. It's weird. So your type, there's so much going on here that I'm not sure what the sun and those images have to do with nursing and interventions and care provided. Again, content is most important, not what it looks like. I'm not trying to pull out something just for the sake of pulling it out, of using a cool graphic or something. So here's someone who did not want to just have a plain white slide with black text, but this actually impedes my readability. So the shadow effect is not necessary. It would probably be better without. I think it would be better if you had used a colored webinar agenda or something. I find a lot of bad typography and bad imagery on social media that anybody can create, right? Because anybody can, and they do. So here's something I want you to avoid doing as well. Type on top of images is definitely something I want you to avoid, but also putting an outline around type. Again, it's Comic Sans, and you know how I feel about that. You want to avoid outlining type because you're trying to get it so that you can read the type better. Just don't put it on an image. Will probably be the best way for you to do that. Again, here's another type on top of an image, and then putting this kind of gray outline around it. It doesn't help. It actually turns us away, and we don't want to read this content. You know, here's another type effect that a lot of people will use. They're stretching type for one, which is terrible. And they're also putting a gradient in every letter or in all the letters altogether. There's no reason for this. It's just a bell and whistle. And again, it takes away from what you're talking about. Now let's talk about alignment. Center alignment should be used for poems and headlines only. And headlines would not be more than 7 to 10 words, more than likely. Hopefully your headlines are between 3 and 7 words. That's the only place that it's okay to use centered type. Centered type otherwise is really difficult to read. The hardest to read type is vertical type, so you want to avoid that. It actually makes the reading slower for your audience. Line spacing and leading. The space between the lines is called leading. They used to put lead in between the lines of type. This is too tight. This actually, again, is overwhelming your viewer. Should be on 2 slides instead of 1, maybe even 4 slides, and pull each sentence out on its own slide. The type either needs to be smaller, which we know it can't be much smaller, needs to be in sans serif, and it definitely needs to have more space between each line, more leading. Line length. There's a lot of space at the bottom, and it looks like the type is stretched from the left to the right. There's a little margin on the left and more margin on the right, but you have these orphans, or these single words that are on these second lines. It would be better, since you have vertically the space, pull it in a good deal and have each bullet take up more than 1 line, more than 2 lines. That way you don't have these single words on a line on their own, and you have 5 to 7 words on a line. Here's my printed syllabus. It's nothing exciting, just trying to meet the needs of my school by doing the syllabus in Word this way. But again, instead of having line length be, at 20 words per line, I put it into 2 columns and have it at a comfortable 12 words per line at most. That is a comfortable reading amount of words to read on 1 line, is 12 to 14 words. So put it in 2 columns. Give it to your students. It'll be much easier for them to understand and read. And anybody can do that. Now, the amount of text that you have on your slide is incredibly important. This probably should have been broken up into 2 slides. The blue bullets and then the green bullets. Or you could have broken it into 6 slides, and each slide had their own, each bullet had its own slide. You could use images that way. Proximity to the edges. You'll notice I like to have a lot of white space around the edge of my slides. This is really important. It's because it's personal space. The type has personal space compared with the images, or type with other type. And it creates tension that we're not striving for when we put things too close to the edges or we put them too close to each other. So if you notice, the last bullet is too close, is actually closer to the photo than it is to the 3rd bullet, start with friends. We should actually have the image be lower, or the bullets all be raised up so that they are connecting more with each other than the last one is connecting with the image. This is way pushing the boundaries of the slide capacity. It has a lot of tension physically, and you want to bring it in. This could have been broken into 2 slides, 3 on one, 2 on the other, and you can bring the headline down and have more white space and more margins. This is pushing the edges, not vertically, but left and right. This is a much better solution for that, even though it is all centered. A lot of times people will fill a text box with a color. And what that does is it creates tension right there, because there's not enough space vertically. You have the left and right space, but you don't have the vertical space to have a comfortable space around the type. So what I would suggest is create 2 boxes. Create one box that's going to be a color, and create another box that's going to have the text. White space is critical and crucial in your design. This is a very simple slide. It's using color by using 1, 2, 3, and 4 as in a different color. Table of contents has a little header at the top. Again, these are simple that you could do, but there's lots of white space, and that is okay. When your visuals feel like they are pushing the boundaries, it will feel like they are walking into a hoarder's house and they will only want to leave. When your visuals don't provide space to breathe, you overwhelm and repel your audience. Much like these ads, there's too much going on, too many different typefaces. You should limit yourself to 2 different typefaces, as well as a consistent color palette. So let's get into imagery. Here's 7 elements to consider when you're creating imagery and using imagery. You want to make sure there is a connection with the type. So the proximity to the type. When your type and your image are too far apart, they actually connect more with the outside edge than they do with each other. You don't want to separate the type and the image too far apart, or it's going to appear that the type is repulsed by the image. Backgrounds. You're going to look for backgrounds that have low contrast and that are not busy. Some images make it too difficult to read the type, and there's too much type to be able to read the image. So you want to use that image on its own and then show the text on its own slide. You don't want to put the image behind the type. Something like this. This is a great example of what not to do. I actually can't read the type on top of the image, and I can't read the image with the type on top of it. So you want to avoid this design with a fury, and because you're confused and you're going to frustrate your reader, and you're going to lose that trust that you've been building. So again, here's type on top of an image. It's a beautiful image, probably not great to put this type on top of it, centered, and the kind of it has that echo effect. I'm not really sure that that's doing much. And then they're using type effects to create this. Again, it takes away from the beauty of the image. Gradients probably should never be used, so avoid it. It's a bell and whistle that is, when used by most people, is used incorrectly. And again, you are building trust, not confusion. So if I put my bra on, the outside of my shirt, it would still work, but no one would know what I was talking about. So there are purposes and places. Your bra goes on the inside of your shirt. So again, we can focus on what you're telling us, not what you are wearing. Gradients muddy the message. You're putting more importance on the context than on the content. And you want to focus on the message. Number 4, choosing your imagery. Clip art sends a message of cheese. One, because they don't usually connect visually with the other clip art used. So instead, create your own or purchase photos or illustrations that are part of a series. You could use a site called iStockPhoto, or hire a designer or illustrator to create a series of illustrations or photographs that have the same sort of color palette and look and feel. Here's that same nursing slide show again. And again, the clip art just looks cheesy. It doesn't go with the sun, and it doesn't go with the gray or anything else. It's like they're just trying to use art, but they're not using it. It doesn't connect well. I usually like these people's designs fine, but what they've done is they've used 3 different clip arts that are created different manners, and so they don't connect together. And that's what you want. You want one message, one clear goal visually. When you resize images, it's really important that you work with a resolution that's appropriate for your medium. So you don't want to scale images disproportionately just to fit your, maybe this is the cowboy one again. Maybe she didn't want that much white space on the left and the right, so she just squished down the image. Well, this doesn't help me to trust you for sure. And if it doesn't fit, don't force it. Instead, scale proportionally and embrace the white space. To scale proportionally, you hold the Shift key down and you click from a corner to pull out or pull in to create an image that's proportionally scaled. Your images speak. Don't let them say the wrong thing. So here's an exercise. What is wrong with this picture? This is an ad from Facebook. The logo has been scaled disproportionately. So they couldn't fit it in the size that was provided, so they just squished it. It actually psychologically affects the way you look at that company. So if you're doing that in your slides, your students are seeing that, even just psychologically, they're seeing that as inconsistent and untrustworthy. Here's an example of one image that I've scaled 2 different sizes. There's the main image, and then I've shrunk it down 2 other sizes proportionally. Let's talk about resolution. This is really bad resolution. When you look at it small, it doesn't look that bad. It's me. But if you don't have a high enough image, then you can't use the image at that size. And what I tell my students is that when you use images that are not the proper resolution, you throw your professionalism out the window. It would be like stuffing your bra. You just need to use this image smaller because it's not real, and we can't make pixels be where pixels aren't. So you should have a consistent look and style in your photos or your illustrations. It just creates a seamless story. So if you don't know how to go about getting these, I have a Pinterest board that you're welcome to follow called Stock Photo or Video Sites. And there's all kinds on there. There's more than on there now. And it tells you a bunch of different stock photography places that you can go. Some actually are even free. If you can take your own photos, which is great, then you might want to use something like PicMonkey. PicMonkey.com allows you to edit basically, and it's free, and you're doing it online, and you can do something, you can crop, you can rotate, you can control exposure and colors and things like that. So it's really basic. It's not as advanced as Photoshop, but probably all you might need. And I would definitely encourage you to create your own images. So you can create your own photos, you can create your own infographics, you can create your own background. As you notice, my background right now is on this is just crumpled paper that I scanned in. So it's very subtle. It doesn't overwhelm my viewer, but it creates something there for you. You can also use screen capture, which I've used. You could also create your own character. Use simple shapes. Triangles, circles, squares, rectangles, half circles, ovals. Use things that you already know how to draw. Here's the letter A. I've made a bird. You can make a lot of things. A pencil, a rocket, a house, all with just letters. You could use tracing paper on top of a photo to create your own drawing. And you could look for inspiration that's already out there and use and purchase someone else's. Legally, you cannot use images that you don't own. So if it's on Google and you've searched for it and it's there, that doesn't mean that you can use it legally. Here's some other basic examples. This is from Real Simple Magazine, February 2013. And these are just pretty simple illustrations that are basic shapes, rectangles, circles, and curved rectangles. Say, oh, I don't know how to draw. Well, this person didn't draw arms or hands or feet. They just pretty much did basic circles and shapes, basic squares and circles. So just to encourage you, I hope that helped. Gives you an idea of some things that you are going to be able to create on your own. I hope that was inspiring. Even if you just did a basic bar of color on the left or a bar of color on the right or at the top or at the bottom. Anything's going to help you to make your message clear so that we're focusing on your message and not on the background imagery. Thanks so much, and thanks, Rob, for having me, and I hope you guys learned something.